Greetings, fellow adventurers of the unknown. Prepare to be amazed by the tales that we share at Paranormal M. Don't miss out. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed about our latest puzzling narratives. Waking up covered in blood. Even though it's been years since it happened, I've finally plucked up the courage to actually write about this because I want to know if there's an explanation for what was happening to me. I'll try my best to be as detailed as possible, despite it happening when I was 7. When I was little, I shared a room with my sister. We had bunk beds, with my sister on the bottom and me on the top. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. When I turned on the bottom light in the bathroom, I looked down to see me covered in blood. And by covered, I mean covered in blood. Starting from the very top of my neck all the way down to my feet. The front plane of my body was red. It looked like I put on 10 bottles of red lotion. You couldn't see my skin at all. It was even between my fingers and my toes. What was even stranger was that the whole front of my body was covered in blood, but there wasn't a speck of blood on my clothes. I was wearing a nightshirt and underwear, but there was no blood on them. There was blood on my chest, arms, and stomach underneath the shirt, but none on my actual shirt. My mom heard me get up and saw the bathroom light on, so she came to check on me. I remember her telling me to take off my clothes so she could wash me off and then sent me to bed to take off my bed sheets, because they would have had to have blood on them. I remember not really freaking out because my mom seemed so calm, so I climbed back up on my bed to take off the sheets. Well, guess what? There was no blood on the sheets either, not a single drop of blood on my white sheets or white blanket. I told my mom and she checked herself, but she didn't see any blood, so she told me to go back to sleep. Years later, I asked her about this night, because at that point, when I thought about it, I thought it must have been a dream because her and I were so calm at the sight of me bathed in blood. When I asked her, though, she told me how terrified that she in fact was. She told me that she tried not to freak out for my sake, but she honestly thought that I got stabbed with how much blood there was. She told me that right away she was looking for wounds, but she couldn't find any. She thought either there was an intruder in the house who stabbed me, which there wasn't because she checked every door and window, or she thought my sister somehow woke up and stabbed me, which was also very unlikely because she has cerebral palsy and wouldn't have been able to climb the ladder by herself. She told me that once I went back to sleep, she checked on me every 10 minutes while I slept for 2 weeks. She told me she couldn't sleep because she got so terrified, and it looked like I stepped out of a horror movie. Over the years, I never really thought about what could be the explanation, but the more and more conspiracy videos and paranormal videos I watch, I'm starting to think that I had to have something paranormal be happening. When I look back at my childhood and put all the little things together, it starts to make sense. For example, when I was little, I used to have horrible nightmares. They were either about the devil or about me dying, sometimes both. I still remember a lot of these dreams, despite it being years. I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder at 8, so I thought maybe the dreams stemmed from my stress or something. I also have sleep paralysis quite often. Normally I'm very chill about it because I've had it so many times, so I tell myself, you'll move when you wake up again. So I would just fall back asleep. The last time that I had sleep paralysis, though, long story short, this dark creature jumped on me and started clawing at my chest to get to my heart. It was so painful, and when I woke up, there was actually pain in my chest. Whenever I pass by a cemetery, I get physical shivers up my spine, which people have seen and commented on before. My mom told me that one time she was driving her old car and it stalled, so she pulled to the side of the road. The engine lights on the dashboard started flashing and the speedometer started spinning, and when everything turned off, the speedometer landed on 66666. She then proceeded to freak out and run out of the car and call my aunt to pick her up. She got rid of the car not long after. I would have thought that this story was fake, but my mom isn't really a religious person, despite raising me in a Catholic household. So she would have no reason to make this up. So basically, I got very sidetracked at the end of this post, thinking of all the weird things that's happened over the years. But my major question is, does anyone have an explanation for me waking up covered in blood when I was 7? And the question to bounce off of that is, could that have been part of a bigger issue based off of all the other things that's happened to me and my family growing up? Is it actually more serious than I think? To be honest, I'm sort of shaking as I'm writing this. I'm recalling all these moments and potentially linking them all together, and it's kind of terrifying me. I saw a white slime climbing a tree tonight. So basically, I was with a group of friends, and we were walking from one condominium to another. There was a forest between these condominiums, with a fence dividing it from the sidewalk. I was behind the group with my friends, and we were walking through a slightly dark part of the street. Both of us saw some white thing in one of the trees. It looked like a slime, and it was moving in a really weird way. Had no legs, no face, and it was a really powerful white. Like there's no chance it was a light or something else. I called for the other guys, and as I shouted, it started climbing really fast in a really bizarre way, as if I scared it. I turned on the lights from the phone to see if I could find it, but honestly, I was too scared and my heart started beating so fast, so I just started running away with my friend. It was so good to have him there, because we talked later, and both of us saw the same thing, and even complimented each other as we talked. So I was sure I was not hallucinating. Of course, none of our friends who were in front of us believed in what we said. Some of them got intrigued, but I wouldn't blame them for not believing it, as I wouldn't blame you. It was really strange. It was like that venom slime, but white. It's my only encounter with something like that, and I just can't explain what it was. It really looked like it was not from this earth. Edit. Just thought as the post got some attention, I figured I should give an update. First off, I wanted to thank everyone that participated. I didn't know this subreddit, and I never participated that much on Reddit at all, but I've read some interesting posts here, and I'll probably stay around. I don't think I'll ever post any other story here again, at least I hope so. Wanted to thank in special the 2 guys who shared their stories seeing this white thing. I've talked to other people about this, but people either don't take it seriously or just have no idea what it is when I describe it. I went back to my place today around 2 p.m. to see if there's anything there, but unfortunately just found nothing. I still have no idea what it was, and I may never know. All I can do now is wait if more people from these condominiums will notice it. 'Cause I swear on everything, that thing is not an animal. That is just beyond science. My only paranormal experience. Rural Alabama Cemetery. Let me start by saying that I'm an 18-year-old male. I fully believe in the paranormal. I've always believed in stories and fully welcomed the opportunity to experience, especially happening to me. Despite this, I never had a paranormal experience until 2 years ago, and I haven't really had one since. For context, I live in ultra-rural Alabama. When I say ultra-rural, I mean even the closest Dollar General is almost 20 minutes away rural. I live at the foot of a heavily wooded mountain. The further you drive up, the less populated it becomes. Even though I lived in this spot for my entire life, I've never really driven up the mountain, just because there was no need to. The city was in the opposite direction of the mountain. From what I knew about growing up, you just drove up and passed a few houses and eventually hit a dead end. Then you'd have to turn around. Well, one day I had a friend over, and we decided that we wanted to hop on a golf cart and take a little joyride up the mountain. We drove for about 30 minutes. Granted, this golf cart only goes like 25 miles an hour max. And we only really seen some beautiful forests and passed a couple of properties. But at this point, we came upon a spot in the road with a clearing off to the right. As we got closer, I realized it was a cemetery. I pulled over into the cemetery and turned my golf cart off. The main reason for this was curiosity. I had no idea there was a cemetery up the mountain, and it was strange to me, considering that we barely had anybody living on the mountain, much less this far up. So my friend and I hop out of the cart and start walking towards the graves. Like I said, I fully believe in spirits and being respectful towards the dead, but my friend didn't at the time. So I'm respectively looking around, reading the markers, attempting to say, my piece and stay a 6-foot distance from the headstones, so I wasn't walking on top of the graves. Well, here my friend goes, on her phone, walking all over the graves. I think she even cracked a couple of jokes about the names on some of the headstones. Some of them were kind of weird, considering the people died in the late 1800s and early 1900s. After I've sufficiently explored, I start walking back to the car. Aloud, I declare, half joking, "Thank you, ghosts, for letting us walk around your space. Sorry if we walked all over your graves." My friend yells at me, "Fuck them ghosts." I just rolled my eyes, but honestly, I felt a slight shiver down my spine after she said it. I was kind of nervous at this point. We both hopped back in the golf cart, and I turned the key. Of course it wouldn't start. I turned the key multiple times, but it seemed like the battery was dead. For the 3 years I've owned this golf cart, I've never had an issue with it. So in my non-skeptic brain, I immediately felt that this was happening because of what my friend said about the ghosts. But honestly, at this point I was just scared. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking, so I decided to call my dad for help. I checked my service and I had 2 bars, so I was good on a signal cell. I called him and the phone rang 5 times before he answered. I heard nothing on the other end, so I said, "Hello?" And I could hear this heavy, raspy breathing in response. As soon as my brain slightly processed what it was that I was hearing, my dad hung up. I tried to call him back, but my cell signal had now dropped off completely, even though I hadn't moved at all. So at this point, even my friend looked scared. We're both thinking the same thing. I'm beginning to hyperventilate and I lay my head down on the steering wheel, and I just begin to pray out loud for protection. Maybe to help the car start running. I tell my friend to pray as well, but she says, Please let the cart start. I'm sorry for what I said. I turn the key. The cart starts, and I peeled out of there as fast as possible. When I get home, my dad is outside working on one of his projects. My friend and I walk up to him, and I ask him why he hung up on me because I needed help. He said he never received a call from me. I told him that's impossible because he picked up and I heard him breathing over the phone. He shows me his recent calls, and in fact, he had no calls or missed calls from me. This was almost 3 years ago, and I haven't been back to the cemetery or had any other paranormal experiences since then. I saw a spirit when I was younger, and other members of my family saw him too at different times. When I was about 11 years old, I was staying at my grandma's house. I need to explain quickly the distribution of the house so you'll get the story. There were 3 rooms on the second floor. 2 bedrooms were next to each other, my uncle's and mine, and at the other side, my grandma's. I used to sleep with my door open. I don't know why, but big mistake. One night, I woke up after midnight. Literally, I could see from my bed directly to the stairs, and thanks to the moonlight, it was a bit illuminated. I opened my eyes and I saw this figure, a bold man in a black suit just looking at me from the stairs. It was the most heavy shit feeling I've ever had in my life. Until now that I'm 27, I get chills only for remembering it. I closed my eyes and covered just my whole body in blankets, scared as fuck. Then I had the brightest idea to uncover and check. That man was at my door, just standing and watching me. In that moment, I just basically jumped from the bed and ran to my grandma's room. I tried to wake her up, but she didn't. I swear, I cried, I screamed like hell, I even moved her. I thought that spirit killed her or something. She used to have one of those alarm clocks that had the red lights, and it was making a 4 a.m. beeping sound, and that was the last thing that I remember from that night. Now the weirdest thing. I'm pretty sure I was awake. I don't lie with this stuff because I've always had creepy things going on. But what I'm about to tell you is the most chilling part of this. Some years ago, I was already like 22. We had a family dinner and my aunt came to visit. She also lived in my grandma's house, but she left when she got married. I decided to tell them a ghost story. I always thought that what happened to me was kind of an astral trip. You know, when you leave your body. Desdoblamiento in Spanish. And that was my own explanation of why my grandma couldn't hear me when I tried to wake her up that night. And that's also possibly why I could see that man. After I told the story, my aunt looked at me and told me that she'd also seen that man. In the same house and gave the exact same description as mine. Literally, my eyes started watering out of fear and started laughing nervously. We decided to call my uncle who lives in Argentina and ask him if he'd seen anything at that house. We just asked about ghosts in general at the house. So he answered. Yes, once I saw a man dressed in black at the common room downstairs, bold and just existing there. He was the 3rd person that saw the exact same thing, and that's what I consider to be the proof of this spirit's existence. I don't know if he was a good or bad spirit, but he was creepy. He looked like Voldemort in terms of skin color, so you have an idea of how pale that he was. The suit was all black up to his neck, and his eyes were just opened, not blinking, just staring directly. I even asked my grandma about it. She told me that she remembers that once she was in the kitchen downstairs and the microwave just turned on, but that's it. This is pretty much the story I consider to be my worst. Mostly because this one I saw, and somebody else also saw too, and it's confirmed. We all saw that thing at different times in our lives, and we were all pretty serious about it too. The Kimono Girl. When I was growing up, I was living in a pretty rural area in western Washington, completely surrounded by woods in a little one-story house. My parents had picked the plot of land to build on about a year or two before I was born. I was raised there for the first 11 years of my life. Starting when I was around 3 years old, I vividly remember that any time I had the sensation of my ears ringing, an incredibly high pitch, I associated it with the sight of a little Japanese girl. I remember her red kimono with black patterns, gold lining, and her scraggly long black hair. Oddly enough, I don't even think I ever had seen a kimono at that point in my life. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just like the girl who makes the ringing sound when she opens her mouth. She would often be standing in the corner of whatever room I was in at the time, but always looking in my direction. That is, when she wasn't sobbing hysterically. She never felt threatening, so I never talked to my family about her. I was also an incredibly shy child, so I never tried to speak to her either. As I got older, she eventually stopped appearing when my ears would ring. Later, when I was about 15 years old, I was looking into the theories about ghosts for fun, and learned about the whole idea that when your ears start to ring for no reason, that means a ghost is trying to communicate with you. Upon reading that, I was met with the deepest chills. I'd never experienced these kind of chills, never before. My eyes started just streaming tears uncontrollably. I've always been skeptical, but fascinated by the paranormal, and that really hit me hard in that moment. I'm 30 now, have no signs of tinnitus, but still feel an overwhelming sense of unease and even sadness when I recall that little girl or tell the story to others, like now. Ask Reddit. I went with my best friend during high school for summer vacation to his grandparents. They live in the countryside in Japan. I stayed in his mom's old room, which has a small wall closet. Just above this closet was a smaller closet door, like 1.5 feet tall and about 3 feet wide. Just above it, weird design, but their house is old. The first couple of weeks, I was pretty jet-lagged, and Japan is hot and humid, so I didn't really sleep at night. If my light was off at night, though, I always felt uneasy about that small closet space. Something about it just felt darker than the rest of the room. Toward the end of the second week, I started to adjust to the time difference. One morning I woke up and that small door was open. It was unsettling, but I closed it and just thought maybe it was closed all the way and just came loose. A couple of nights later, I woke up feeling uneasy. It was dark and I could kind of see, and I could see that this was the first and only time that I was perhaps experiencing sleep paralysis. I was too scared to move, say, or do anything. I just felt this darkness coming from there. I don't remember sleeping that night, but I told my friend about it, who said his mom told him about something like that too. When we got back home and I talked to his parents, his mom kind of joked with me. "So I heard you met the ghost." Attachment. This story starts with a boyfriend of one of my friends, that they had a few months back. They dated for about a year, and their relationship was always rocky. They lived together for a period of time, and while he was living with her, weird things would happen. Prior to him living there had been no strange encounters. There were situations that I didn't personally encounter, as I wasn't at her apartment at the time, but a few things she had mentioned were things that, like items would go randomly missing and turn up days or weeks later in places that she had previously checked. She would call me late at night and tell me how she would hear knocking in threes on her walls. There were also times that she would feel like she was being watched. It got to the point where she wouldn't be at home alone anymore. There was a specific time where her boyfriend saw a dark, manly figure smile widely at him, in quotes. This was from outside the open bedroom door, a bit after 2 a.m. My friend, however, didn't see this, but she did hear the bedroom door slam, and when she went into the room to check it out, she found him sitting in the bed, eyes wide and unable to cough up a sentence. That said, they came and stayed with me at my place. After they had left, I started having weird things happening at my house. One night, I heard what sounded like breathing, but I had my music on, so it wasn't very audible. Once I turned my music off, I didn't hear anything right away, but after a few seconds of sitting there listening, I heard and felt a loud breath right against my left ear. I was startled so badly I ran out of my house into the neighbor's house. Another time, my bedroom door stared. It's kind of just slowly opening. Sorry, they wrote stared. I assume they meant started. But no one was there, not even my cat. Thankfully, a couple of months after, I had moved into my new place, and since I have no experiences like that in my new place. There was another time her boyfriend at the time would zone out, quote unquote. During these zone outs, weird things would occur. One time while I was there, I noticed him zoning out. His eyes were widened, and he began hearing what sounded like walking coming from the other room. When he focused his attention back to us again, he stopped hearing it. Ever since he left, my friend has had no more experiences. Which leads me to wonder, was something attached to him? Was this a ghost or something else? This event takes place in my cousin's childhood home about 7 years ago. My aunt and my youngest cousin still live there, but my cousin who witnessed this with me has since moved. For purpose of this story, I will refer to my older cousin as E and my younger cousin as R. I'm just going to call them Ellen and Rebecca, the narrator's choice here. It was early morning in July. On this day, we were packing up to go on a trip to visit our family members in Oregon. This all takes place in the upstairs, so I will describe the layout. This is an older house built sometime in the 60s. The upstairs is a very long and narrow hallway. On one end of the hall, there's a bathroom. On the other end of the hall, there's a large bookcase. On the right side of this hall, there are 2 bedrooms, one by the bathroom and one by the bookcase. The bedroom by the bathroom was Rebecca's room. The other one was a guest room, and on the left side of the hall, across from the guest room, and next to the bookcase, there was a little door. And this little door would never open. We could also never find the key. My aunt said that she had never seen the key either. When we were younger, we'd like to pretend to be ghost hunters. On this morning, we were pretending to be ghost hunters per usual. I had a weird interest with this door. I still don't understand why. Probably because you were curious and never been in there. However, I was very drawn to it. What's weird in this particular day is there was a scary old-looking key sitting on the bookshelf next to this door. I grabbed it and tried to see if it was, the right fit for the lock, and it was. My cousins were scared to open the door themselves. We all had uneasy feelings. However, me being the oldest, I decided that I would do the ballsy move and open the door. When I did, nothing was in there, just a bunch of insulation, spider webs, and it had no light. Very disappointing. We put the key back, shut the door, and went downstairs to go get a snack. When we went back up, the key was gone and the door was locked again. Very weird, but as kids, we didn't think much of it. Fast forward, and it was about time to go on the trip. My mother and aunt were outside in the van chatting. So they sent us inside to find Rebecca and Ellen. And I was just walking around the house calling for her, but couldn't find her. Keep in mind, Rebecca was 10 years old at the time and Ellen was 11. And I was 12. Rebecca was wearing rainbow leggings, orange Crocs, and a t-shirt. Rebecca had very beautiful long brown hair that went down to her waist. Keep all of this in mind. Ellen and I checked Rebecca's room. She wasn't in there. When we walked back out into the hallway, we both saw the exact same thing. We still talk about it today, and every time that we talk about it, we both recall the exact same events. When we entered the hallway, we saw a young girl around our age who was wearing a white dress with pink ruffles on the sleeves, as well as the bottom. She had on white stockings and a little white slip-on with one strap across the top. All we could see was the back of her. Her hair was beautiful, long and brown, just like Rebecca's hair. And she had a pink ribbon bow tied to her hair, like half-up style. We didn't think that someone else could be in the house, so we went into the hallway. Ellen asked, "Rebecca, when did you change and where did you get that dress?" Once she asked that, the being started walking down the hallway to the guest room. We followed her, thinking it was Rebecca acting weird. When we turned into the guest room, no one was there. We even opened the closet. Nothing. After that, we went back out the back door, and there was Rebecca sitting in the treehouse in the very back corner of the yard, still in the same rainbow leggings and red shirt as earlier. We were extremely freaked out and tried telling our mothers what we saw, but they did not believe us. We've never seen it again, but my cousin would always tell me that she would hear weird things in the house that were unexplainable. What are your thoughts? Was this a ghost or something else? Do you think us opening that door had anything to do with this weird experience? I think something is following me. So for some background, I've recently moved house. I used to live in a big old manor house. I'm not sure what year it dates back to, but it's next to it, like a twin. The main house, which dates back to 1781, so I'm assuming it's around the same time frame. Obviously, with a building this old, it's very daunting, and you'd assume that it was haunted. It also got turned into an old person's home at some point in time. But I've recently moved to another house that dates back to the 1800s. Whilst I was in the manor house, me and everybody else living there would experience weird things. Nothing dangerous, but weird nonetheless. And we'd all brush it off as just it being an old house and me being a kid. Things that would happen frequently. Doors closing, opening, electronics, light bulbs turning off and on, doors locking, loud noises coming from inside the bedrooms, like banging noises. I don't want to drag this on longer than it needs to be, but I have a lot of experiences in that house. So if anyone wants a more in-depth explanation, feel free to ask questions, but to the point. I've always having these extremely vivid dreams that feel and look real, to the point where I wake up and I still believe I'm dreaming. Since moving to this house, the same things are happening. Lights turning off and on. We had a weird experience with our Alexa playing music randomly. Old-timey music. But the thing that's making me feel crazy is the dreams. Just before I fall asleep, I keep hearing a man speaking in my room, as if he's right next to me. It's that clear, but I'm always on the verge of sleep, so I just brush it off as a dream. But what really got me was I got on a phone call the other day from my mom whilst I was out, just asking where I was. I had been out all day, and it was 2 a.m. at this time. She called me and she told me that she had called out my name, and when I got home, I responded. And she had a conversation with me, but it wasn't me because I wasn't home. She realized when she went to my room and I wasn't there. Past weird encounters. When I was about 8 until 17, I lived in a house that we had built in a development. My mom was convinced it was haunted, but I'm the type of person where I need conclusive evidence to really believe it. There are 2 times, though a lot of that experiences that I was having, I can't really explain what they were, but they are the closest thing to evidence that I have. One day around Christmas time, when my youngest brother was about 3, he was in his high chair in the kitchen eating, because we were all eating dinner. The rest of my family were cleaning up, and he was just babbling to himself like he usually did. This time, the babbling was weird, though. He was looking at the ceiling, and it seemed like he was actually talking to someone. Then he started to cry and say, "Don't go, don't go," hysterically crying while his eyes were just trailing towards the ceiling about where my parents' bedroom was. 2 seconds later, the fire alarm started blaring. Nothing on the first floor was on fire, so we all rushed upstairs to see what was going on. Every Christmas, my mom would light this Christmas candle, and she would decorate it with all this stuff. The thing with the candle is you leave it lit until it goes out on its own, and it's supposed to give you good luck. The decorations were on fire, and the flame was really high. We got it out before something happened, so we're all good, but that was the biggest thing that I can ever really say I experienced. That would make me a little bit less skeptical about paranormal experiences. Now on to number 2. It wasn't as big as the first thing, but one day I was taking a shower by myself upstairs, and it was only my mom downstairs. I got out of the shower and dried off and put the towel around my waist to my head and just go to my bedroom, which was right to my right. As I was walking out, though I heard so clearly and vividly from my sister's room, a young male voice that went, I immediately smiled, and I was about to laugh because I thought it was my best friend at the time. Maybe they were hiding there to surprise me and acting gay or something to mess with me. I turned to my left and no one was there. I was all alone, yet it sounded like they were right next to me. Who is the girl? A little background. My parents built this house in 2008, and we moved in then. The land before was most likely a field for a farm down the road. The mistake my parents made while having this house built is having mirrors in their bathroom that face each other. I've always been afraid of their bathroom, but this incident scared me so badly as a kid and honestly still does. I was probably 7 or 8 and I had just gotten out of the shower. The bathroom is shaped in a C. Mirrors at the top and bottom of the C and shower on the side and the bath on the gap. I was in the far side, furthest from the door, facing a mirror with the other one behind me. I was washing my face, brushing my hair, and all of a sudden, I looked up and to the left of me was this little girl. She looked to be about my age, long blonde hair, and she looked like she was almost see-through and very pale. I remember her having a rainbow glow to her. As a child, seeing a girl behind you randomly was definitely scary, so I whipped around. She was gone. She isn't the scariest spirit in the house, but that encounter I definitely remember. Even writing this, I feel nauseous and like I'm about to faint. The whole encounter traumatized me. Something that made me, or I guess this really might be completely unrelated, is I used to sleepwalk a lot and talk to someone while sleepwalking. One night I walked and I was trying to go outside. I was halfway through the yard when my parents came and got me. I still don't know how a 7 or 8-year-old could unlock 2 doors in her sleep, walk down a flight of stairs, and halfway through a swampy yard at midnight. We haven't really brought up this incident in a real long while, and it's more mischievous of a spirit that roams the house that came after a Ouija board incident when I was 10. But I haven't seen this little girl since, and I hope she was able to find some sort of peace. Grandfather at the end, and interacting with deceased relatives. My grandfather is unfortunately at the end of his life, riddled with dementia and having strokes weekly. He's on hospice, and our family's made peace with his last few days. He's unable to recognize any of us, and it's clear that he's no longer perceiving the world around him coherently. He's mostly non-speaking now, and will only grumble sometimes when he's in pain or has a primary functional need. I live very close to my grandfather and drop in regularly, although he does have a 24/7 caregiver now. Last Tuesday's caregiver called me and asked me to come over. As she smelled like smoke and my grandfather was acting odd, she felt like it might be the surge or terminal lucidity right before death. I came straight over, and as soon as I walked in, the smell of cigarette smoke hit me in the face. We have cameras on in the house at all times to check in, and none of the caregivers smoke. It smelled like an old pool hall. Sure enough, my grandfather was talking completely coherent sentences, but he wasn't talking to us. He was talking to Jack. He was talking directly to the corner of the room, giving full details about the plans for the weekend. The lawnmower he had been working on, the plan for the new pool that we were going to have installed. Issues he's been having with my grandmother. This went on for 20 minutes. We would attempt to speak with my grandfather, but it was like we didn't exist. He couldn't take his eyes off the corner of the room. The scary part for me is that Jack was a very real person who died about 15 years ago. He was my grandfather's brother-in-law, and they were the best of buds. This by itself wouldn't have been that scary, but the smell. Neither of my grandparents were smokers, ever. But Jack was an absolute chain smoker. He would never be caught really ever without a cigarette. And he didn't eventually pass away from lung cancer. We checked every possible option in the house that could cause the smoke smell with no avail. The smell was only in this one room, not outside, not in the next room over. 30 minutes of this went by and then it stopped. My grandfather became incoherent again, and the smell subsided. It wasn't the surge, because almost a week later he's still with us and it hasn't happened again. I don't believe in the paranormal. I like the stories, but I've never had an experience that made me a believer. But I do feel that my grandfather is somewhat on the threshold of life and death, and maybe he's able to meet some of his loved ones in the middle. super freaked out, disembodied laughter. So I live alone. It's never been an issue. I've had boyfriends say that I should at least live with a roommate, but I never felt the need. I've lived in the apartment for almost a year and a half now. It's old, but not super old. Maybe 60 years at most. Anyway, I was at home yesterday after work, winding down for bed. I turned off my TV, all my lights, headed to brush my teeth and clean up. At this point, everything was off. I did my usual routine, and as I was heading out of the bathroom to my bedroom across the hall, I heard a small thump in my living room. I figured it was one of my cats, so I went to go check and see if everything was okay or if it was damaged, as my cats tend to be mischievous. I walked in, flicked on the light, saw nothing. Nothing was out of place. However, my cat Loki, in theme, was losing his mind and all squared up at the corner of the room. He was facing the direction of my room, the way I had just come from. I know my cats very well, and yes, they sometimes stare at walls, but he was freaked the hell out. Very out of character for him. My other cat, Odin, was spooked, but not nearly as much. After a couple of seconds of assessing the situation, I heard crystal clear a laugh come from my bathroom. It didn't sound evil, but it certainly didn't sound nice. I live in an apartment, so I know sounds happen, but a few things got my skin crawling here. First, I know what my neighbors sound like. It was definitely not them. Second, I'm located in the corner of the building. The direction the sound came from would be either the stairwell or outside the building. But it wasn't muffled, it was clear. And finally, it was obvious where the sound came from, inside my apartment. I live on the second floor and there's no way to get that clear of a sound in my apartment without it being in my apartment. And finally, today at work, I thought I heard the same laughter in the bathroom at work, very faintly outside the door. I'm incredibly distraught and freaked out. My paranormal experience. When it comes to supernatural things like ghosts or spirits or witches, magic or demonic possession, I consider myself agnostic towards those things. So I don't necessarily believe in them, but I don't rule them out as a possibility as well. Now, my experience happened to me about 3 years ago when I was still in high school. I was a junior. I had gotten up to do my morning routine, make some breakfast before getting dressed and leaving for school. To get a better idea of things, the layout of the house is pretty simple. The kitchen has a clear view of the hallway that leads to my room on the end, right at the right of it. But it also has a view of my great-uncle's office, where he does his work on the left side of the hallway, with my room just 5 feet down from it. With that, I had finished making breakfast and planned on eating it in my room. As I rounded the corner of the fridge with a full view of the office, the door was open and I saw this black round shadow thing that looked like a head peering from behind the door. No defining features or anything, just a shadow. Of course, I was kind of freaked out. All I could do was stand frozen in my spot. I blinked and then it was gone like some cheesy horror movie. Being ever skeptical, I moved from my spot, hoping to recreate the effect that maybe it was just a shadow of an object, but no luck. Then I decided to investigate for myself, since I had to pass the door anyway to get to my room. Walking in the office, I had looked around to see if there was maybe any objects that might have had the same profile of what I had seen in the kitchen, in case my great-uncle had just put something in there and I didn't know about it. But like before, there was nothing. I just decided to write it off as a weird optical illusion and went to go eat my breakfast in my room. I was in my room, I was eating, just trying to forget that whole experience. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I had my door open and I found myself constantly looking to see if someone was right outside my door. But of course, there wasn't. I decided to just close the door, but that didn't help with the feeling of me being watched. Now, what I'm going to say next, I swear happened. A loud knock came from the other side of my door. At this point, I was a bit uncomfortable and jumpy, but that knock was my last straw. I immediately went to open the door, not wasting any time, hoping that it was my great aunt on the other side. No one. Not a single person. My great aunt and uncle, their door was closed, meaning they were still asleep. I was alone. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I was no longer comfortable being in my room. I got ready for school immediately, even though it was far too early before I was supposed to be there. I couldn't stand that feeling of someone watching me. There was something I couldn't understand happening, and I didn't like it, so I left. Ever since then, when I'm alone at home, I still get a feeling of someone watching me, but I can never see anybody. I despise it, so I try to stay in lit areas and keep a TV on to drown out the quiet and the dark. Holiday hauntings. So I thought the readers of this Reddit might find this story interesting. This is going to be a rambling and pretty long, so apologies ahead of time. I just got back from a week's stay at a beautiful country manor. This place was built somewhere around 1540, so it had some real history behind it. I was there with my partner, my 2 kids, and my parents. It's situated in a fairly remote countryside region, so very, very quiet at night. We've stayed there once before, and on that occasion, there was one slightly strange encounter where both me and my partner heard one of the kids come to the bedroom door one night, only to find no one there. Otherwise, there was just an odd atmosphere at night, but nothing else. This most recent stay, however, things intensified. It started with me being woken around 3 a.m. to what I thought was my partner tapping me on the waist. He, however, was sound asleep facing the other way. Never mind, I thought, so I rolled over and went back to sleep, refusing to think too much on it. This happened a few nights in a row. Also, the bathroom light had taken to hissing and flashing whenever I went in there, but I put this down to the age of the place and that it was prone to power cuts. Anyway, one night I had this very intense half-sleep, half-awake dream. Someone was calling me, really calling me, and something else was with me telling me that I absolutely shouldn't go to it. Like it was insistent I shouldn't go and even thought I really needed to pee. I shouldn't go and I should just hold it until the sun comes up. Freaked me out a little bit, but I kept it to myself as I didn't want to scare the kids. So the next day I'm talking to my mom and she tells me that the night before she'd heard someone calling Mommy. She'd checked around and on the kids, they were asleep, and she couldn't find what was calling me. So I then told her about the dream and yeah, we both found it to be, let's just say, a touch unsettling. Then on my last night there, I was sleeping on one side slightly off the edge of the bed. Something clearly ran a finger over my shoulder and down my arm. Again, partner sound asleep facing the other way. So I tucked further into the bed and went back to sleep. Ask Reddit. This didn't happen to me, but to my parents. My mom going off the deep end and on a crazy train isn't that out of character. But my dad doesn't do that ever, and he swears the story is legit. When I was around 2-ish, my mom woke up from a nightmare, and she woke my dad up too. He tried going back to sleep, and she told him not to because his mom was going to call soon, because, not using their name, had been decapitated in some sort of accident. My dad, of course, thought that this was nonsense, but my mom was hysterical over it, so she couldn't sleep. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the phone was ringing. It was his mom letting him know that his friend and the friend's little brother's girlfriend had both died in a car crash coming home from a party about 3 miles away from us. My dad's mom and their family were very close, and my grandma, my dad's mom, shouldn't have to explain, but it's getting a bit all over the place, and the mother from that family were lifelong friends and died at just 6 months apart. Anyway, later learned that my dad's friend had been decapitated when he lost control in his ragtop Camaro. Hit a tree, flipped the car upside down, and slid a ways on down the road. Neither he nor his younger brother's girlfriend were wearing seatbelts. This would have been back in maybe 1981-ish. Ask Reddit. I was out for a walk early one morning in a forest preserve, and it's usually pretty empty. I start coming around a corner, and I can see a car that's parked in the grass just outside of a parking lot. I think it's strange, but I keep on walking. I'm probably like 50 feet from the car now, and suddenly the trunk pops open. The car alarm starts going off and the driver's side door opens. I'm coming from the passenger side and I can't see the driver, but I get a bad feeling about the situation. I still keep walking on the path and come around where I can see the driver's side of the car. A guy is sitting in the car in the driver's seat and starts to wave me over to him. He throws up his hands and says, "I'm not sure what's going on. Could you come help me?" I tell him, "Nah, he's on his own," without breaking my stride, and I keep moving. He throws his hands up again and turns off the car alarm and gets out and shuts the trunk. And then he gets in and drives away. I'm creeped out, so once he's out of sight, I double back and walk the opposite way, just to be safe. I walk back probably like 30 minutes. That's where it takes me to get to where I parked my car. When I'm getting close, I hear that car alarm going off again. I'm freaking out now, but I didn't want to walk back into the woods again, so I keep going to the parking lot. When I get there, that same car is parked with its trunk open, car alarm going off, and the driver's door open. The guy is already talking to someone else in the parking lot. He sees me come into the lot, looks at me for a minute, then shuts off the car alarm, closes the trunk, and drives away again. I just booked it to my car and called the park rangers, but they didn't believe anything was weird about it. I'm like 90% sure that dude was trying to kidnap someone. Ask Reddit. My wife and I went on a haunted walking tour of quote-unquote Old Town San Juan Capistrano. We enjoy the spooky stories and the history, but never really took the haunted part too seriously. At a stop at one of the old houses, the tour guide explained the history of the house and how she thought of it as her favorite stop. She said she'd experienced the former resident, Alice, and that she always felt welcome there. She said people have seen shadows cross the room at night and other times, but never threatened. She also said one of her fellow guides liked the house as well, but for the opposite reasons. He never felt welcome and always had a disturbing feeling at that part of the tour. As we were standing by the front door, the house is not open to the public. Other people, 2 other women, on the tour were asking Alice to show herself and peering in the window and through the door. My wife looked on with interest while I stood back in the patio and leaned up against the railing. Nothing happened to them or for them, so they left that area and walked around to the other side. I stayed for a moment longer, looking inside the house from where I stood. It was then that I felt a gentle pressure on my chest. Not like a hand, but still a gentle push of some sort, accompanied by my overall tingling sensation in my body. I also felt the intense compulsion to leave right away, which I did. As I walked around the corner where the rest of the group was, my wife saw me and must have seen something on my face, even through the darkness. I explained the sensations I felt, and the tour guide said, "That's Alice." We talked for a bit and wondered why I and the other male tour guide felt that way, when most everybody else felt welcomed. My wife suggested that perhaps Alice did not like men. About 6 hours later, around 3 a.m. or so, when we were in bed, I experienced the first night terror I've had in quite a long time, and the only sleep paralysis I've ever experienced. In what I felt like a dream, I saw somebody come into my room, an adult-sized shadow. It moved around to my wife's side of the bed to lay down. It was at the time that the sleep paralysis occurred. I tried to move, I tried to talk, but all I could produce was a gurgling, rapid snoring sound. I was trying to form words, but just made noise. My wife poked me, she often does, when I snore, and I was able to form a raspy, almost words of a name and help. It was clear in my head, but I don't really know how to make it clear to her. What I do know is she woke up and shook me, concerned for my well-being. And that is the thing that broke my sleep paralysis. I apologized, but she didn't want to go into details at that time. She drifted back to sleep fairly quickly. It took me maybe 15 to 20 minutes to calm down and go back to sleep. I'm a receptive skeptic, but that was the first time I've experienced anything like that. Ask Reddit. When I was 6 years old, we moved next to my father's parents' house. Suddenly, my mom saw me talking to something that wasn't there. She didn't pay too much attention since she's tough, and it was just maybe an imaginary friend phase, as she calls it. After a few days, my friendship, in quotes, started to freak my mom out, and I started asking why my friend always said why he was allowed to stand next to the stove and I wasn't. She then tried to explain that he was just imaginary. "He lives under the sink," I said. My mom told me that I could tell her the exact actions and emotions that this boy had. She struggled to make me understand that he wasn't real, and she thought it was just a phase until my grandfather said he found out a boy sitting on the backyard door. The backyard was a common area between my house and my grandparents' house. He was sitting there in the middle of the night. When he asked if he was okay, the boy said he was waiting for his mom and he couldn't leave. My grandpa called his wife, and when he came out, the boy wasn't there. My grandparents said that whenever they were outside to take out the trash at night, they could see the boy sitting in the backyard for a few minutes, and then he would just vanish. Ask Reddit. My best friend of my whole life, and my only friend for a good chunk of my life, died about a week before we found out my then girlfriend was pregnant. I still hadn't graduated college due to a requirement that was overlooked by both myself and my counselor. I had started working full-time to help take care of my son before he was born, so my days were pretty much non-stop. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., get to work by 5:30, work until noon or so, drive back home to shower really quick, leave for school, get to school, depending, maybe about 40 minutes or an hour later, go to class, leave school around 9 p.m., go home, do whatever homework, and then sleep. I did this for months, and one day I was hitting my limit. I was so tired. If I could only do one of these set of things, then I would just have so much more energy to hang out with my son, be a good boyfriend to my girlfriend, help out more around where we stayed. I worked Sunday through Thursday, and one Thursday, after I had come home and didn't have class afterwards, I was laying down with my son. I had homework due the next day, and I was about halfway done with it. I was lying there, eyes closed, no one in the room but my son and I. Then a steady series of very hard and loud taps on my window woke me from my quasi-sleep. Sometimes when my neighbors were watering some plants, they would hit my window with it, and it sounded almost like that. But the window was dry. I thought maybe it was my father-in-law knocking on my window to say hi to the baby. I opened the door from my room to see everybody else who lives in the house just in the living room and dining room. So I closed the door again. Right before the knocking, I said in my own head, "Hey, V." My friend's name was long, so I'm just going to call him V. "I think I'm just going to drop out." Once I realized there was no one else, no other cause, I sighed and I just said, "Message received, bro." Grabbed out my homework. That was it. The other takes place about a month or so after my son was born, roughly 10 months after my brother's death. I'm still reeling from it, and I'm reeling from being a father. I was randomly out of a park near my house. It was obviously my son's first birthday. He was stumbling around being one, whatever. To my right, I hear my brother's voice. "Hey guys, sorry I'm late." My head shot over to the sound of him saying something, and there he was. I was so excited and shocked, I just went and tackled him straight to the ground, hugging him and crying. My mom, sister, and everyone else also came over to him. I was so happy that he wasn't dead. He wasn't dead. Then it hit me. The sky had no color. Everything felt washed in the brush of a dream. I stopped, looked at him, and then I said, "You died." Previously, he was laughing with everybody else. He tried ignoring me, like a dog that knows it's done something that it shouldn't. "You died." The rest of the party stopped. "You died, didn't you?" He looked away from me, defeated. He said, "Yeah." And it hung in the air. My dream paused, almost as if you could hit a stopwatch to reality. With everyone else frozen, he hugged me and said, "I love you, man. Tell everyone else I love them too." He vanished, and I woke up crying.